the final stanza of Beowulf faded from the holo page, and senior translator Threth Velen became very still.
4 years of translation, and I finally see it. The pattern is not literary. It is tactical.
He turned to his assistant, Lyrina, his voice tight with a fear she had never heard.
Get General Merrick. Tell him the humans have been broadcasting their entire military doctrine in their bedtime stories for 2 centuries.
He looks terrified. I have never seen his hands shake. Yes, senior translator. I will send the priority beam.
Lyrina's fingers flew across the console, the encrypted channel to General Marek already pinging. Threth Velen pulled up the Edda patterns, the Beowulf formations, evidence he would need within the hour. It would take the galaxy 3 years to confirm what he had just realized. By then, every Empire's intelligence service would have read Earth's children's books cover to cover.
Now I must convince a general that humanity's oldest stories are the most dangerous weapons we have ever encountered.
This had better not be another academic overreaction. Threth Velen, I have a fleet briefing in 12 minutes.
The Eddas encode tactical formations. 19 distinct patterns, repeated across stanzas.
He gestured, and the holo display bloomed with annotated verses, red lines connecting phrases to known battle maneuvers.
Those are advance and envelop formations. That is a pincer movement. You found this in a poem.
And Beowulf, the Mead Hall stand. It is a textbook example of terrain exploitation and defensive positioning. Look.
This is not poetry. This is a field manual disguised as legend.
200 years. Every human radio show, podcast, audiobook, they have been beaming it into space.
And no one read them as anything other than entertainment. The intelligence failure alone is staggering. I need a comprehensive report. Not just these 2 myths, all of them. By the end of the cycle.
It will be done, General. You will have the doctrine of 10,000 years on your desk within the month. The Odyssey. Odysseus spent 20 years returning home. Every delay, every island, it is a masterclass in strategic patience.
2 decades of attrition and maneuvering hidden inside a travel story. This is not an epic. It is a war drawn out until the enemy collapses.
Now the Iliad. The Myrmidons do not fight as individuals. They move as a single body, small unit cohesion, command hierarchy, every man reliant on the next.
And children memorize this by the age of 7. They are drilling unit loyalty into their own population.
The Mahabharata is worse. Krishna counsels Arjuna on the eve of battle, not about weapons, but about duty, sacrifice, the manipulation of morale.
Psychological warfare, ethical frameworks to justify any action. They encoded not just tactics, but the philosophy of war. Thousands of years, multiple cultures, and every myth carries a core doctrine. This is not coincidence. This is a civilization that weaponized its own memory.
Yes, and they never stopped broadcasting it. For 200 years, every empire within 100 light years has been listening to these bedtime stories.
I will inform High Command, prepare the full analysis, every myth, every pattern. This changes our threat assessment for the entire sector.
Threth Velen watched the general leave, then turned back to his console. The real work was just beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of late nights and endless cross-references. Threth Velen barely slept.
Lyrina, cross-check the Gilgamesh grief cycle against the Valori resilience training manuals. I need those matches by morning.
You have said that every day for the past 3 weeks. I have not seen my quarters in 4 days.
She did the work anyway. The data piled up, patterns, annotations, tactical parallels from 8 distinct human mythologies.
Every god, every hero, every journey, it all fits. Not a single wasted verse.
Senior translator, if you do not rest, the report will be submitted posthumously. You have cross-referenced the same stanza 14 times.
It must be flawless. The High Command will look for any reason to dismiss this. We give them none.
On the 47th night, the final appendix locked into place. The 1,400-page document glowed in the dim lab. Every myth, every doctrine, every chain of evidence.
Transmit to General Marek and to the High Command. Priority channel. Full encryption. Let them see what 2 centuries of bedtime stories truly are.
The console hummed as the data streamed outward. Threth Velen leaned back for the first time in days, waiting for the galaxy to decide.
I have read the report. All 1,400 pages. I have verified the broadcasts. Earth sent these stories unencrypted for centuries.
The chamber erupted. Generals who had never questioned Valori's superiority now saw a threat whispering through static for 2 centuries.
The Eddas contain 19 distinct tactical formations. The Iliad teaches unit cohesion. The Mahabharata is psychological warfare. This is not art.
Skeptical faces hardened. The intelligence director's voice cut through the murmurs.
She asked, "Are you saying Earth's nursery rhymes are more sophisticated than our war colleges?" I said, "That is exactly what I am saying. 200 years of open broadcasts. Every empire within 100 light years has been handed humanity's military playbook."
The weight of the room shifted. Skepticism became calculation. The decision formed before the vote.
I move that we share this report with our allies and our rivals. If this is a threat, it is a threat to all of us.
No one objected. The Valori could not face this alone, and every general knew it. Threth Velen's nightmare was about to become galactic policy. The motion passed, the encryption beacons began to light. The encrypted packets reached 6 empires within the hour. Every intelligence arm accepted the Valori dossier without hesitation. 3 days later, a joint council convened, the chamber filled with species who had never agreed on anything.
These myths are not random. The Iliad teaches small unit loyalty. The Odyssey is a 40-volume treatise on strategic patience.
Alien delegates leaned forward, carapace and scales shifting in disbelief. A Kree military attaché demanded to see the Beowulf analysis again.
The Mahabharata provides an ethical framework for warfare so complete that our own codes of engagement seem simplistic.
And humans broadcast this for 200 years, someone asked. In children's programs, in audiobooks, in nightly serials.
Yes. They never classified it. They never restricted it. They read it to their young before they can walk.
The chamber went silent for a full 8 seconds. Then, a dozen voices demanded a joint task force. By the end of the session, 6 empires had pledged analysts. No one agreed on a response, but everyone agreed they could not ignore it. Earth's myths were no longer a Valori secret. They were a galactic puzzle, and the pieces were just beginning to spread. In the joint analysis chamber, teams from 6 empires tore through the Valori report, cross-referencing every translation against their own tactical databases.
They are finding patterns I missed. The Odyssey is not just patience, it is a logistics manual.
Supply chain notations, resource management, long-term sustainment. His journey mapped exactly onto Starfleet attrition models. The Mahabharata's ethics were more disturbing. Analysts isolated 17 moral frameworks that could justify any military action.
They encoded not just how to fight, but when and why. The philosophy of war is a complete system.
But the most chilling discovery came from the Epic of Gilgamesh. His grief over Enkidu was not merely mourning. It was a tactical doctrine, weaponized sorrow, turning loss into collective resolve.
Every human emotion has been weaponized. Love, loss, duty, hope, all of it, encoded in stories.
By the 3rd month, the Joint Task Force reached a grim conclusion. Humanity's myths constituted the most comprehensive military doctrine ever encountered. The question was no longer what the stories contained. It was what the galaxy would do now that they knew. The empires did not wait. Within days of the final report, 3 war colleges announced new mandatory courses. The Iliad's logistics chapters were no longer poetry. They were taught as supply chain doctrine for interstellar campaigns. The Mahabharata's ethical chapters became required reading for officers. Every moral dilemma had a precedent in Krishna's council, a galactic map lit up with new courses. 6 imperial academies, 12 lesser but notable schools. The myths spread faster than any official doctrine. Counter-doctrine teams were formed. Their mission was simple: find weaknesses in the human patterns and exploit them. They failed. Every tactic had a counter embedded layers deep. The myths had evolved to account for their own counters. The doctrine was self-repairing. Cadets who studied the Mahabharata could already justify actions their own governments had not yet approved within a standard year. 13 more academies adopted the texts. The galaxy was learning to think like humans at a military level. Earth, through all of this, remained silent. No acknowledgement, no demand for acknowledgement. They kept broadcasting. The bedtime stories had become the galaxy's most dangerous curriculum, and the teachers were still talking to their children. After 18 months, every counter-doctrine initiative was abandoned. The human myths did not just resist adaptation, they absorbed it. So the empires pivoted. If they could not counter the stories, they would create their own. Funding poured into cultural foundations. Scholars, artists, and war poets were commissioned to embed their own doctrines into enduring narratives. Within 2 years, the first new myth cycles were unveiled at grand ceremonies. The stories were beautiful, dangerous, and utterly alien.
They are imitating humanity without understanding it. These new myths are rigid. They lack the organic selection of centuries.
But the empires were undeterred. A Valori epic about stellar migration, a Kree saga of honor and sacrifice, each meant to encode 1,000 years of warfare. Earth's mythic methods were being copied across the galaxy, and Earth had no idea. The irony was not lost on Threth Velen.
We spent years fearing their doctrine. Now we are terrified of their poetry, so we write our own. The galaxy has become a mirror of Earth.
The cultural renaissance consumed the galaxy, but underneath the celebration, a deeper fear festered. No one knew why Earth's myths worked so well. Threth Velen stared out at the twin suns and began to wonder if perhaps the myth was not the weapon. Perhaps the myth was the shield. Days later, Threth Velen began combing through the raw broadcast archives. Not the translations, but the original transmission logs.
Every broadcast is labeled as entertainment. Not a single one is classified as military or strategic communication.
He found the accompanying covers, colorful images, musical introductions, the gentle voice of a human reading to sleepy children.
They did not hide it because they never saw it as a weapon. It was just a story.
The implications drove him to General Marek's office that same hour.
General, I have reviewed the broadcast archives. The context is purely cultural. Bedtime stories, audiobooks, children's programs. I no longer believe this was an intentional strategy.
You are saying the most sophisticated military doctrine we have ever seen is an accident, a bedtime story.
I am saying it may be an emergent property of their narrative tradition. Stories that worked, survived. The doctrine was never designed. It was selected over thousands of years.
Marek stared at the rotating hologram of the Earth Archive cruiser. The silence stretched, heavy with reconsideration.
Then, we must ask them directly. Draft a diplomatic request to Earth. They will explain their own stories.
Within the hour, a diplomatic message left Valori space. A formal invitation to a cultural symposium on Earth's foundational mythologies. It arrived on Earth during the UN Cultural Affairs morning brief. The request was read twice.
They want me to explain the Odyssey to a room full of aliens. I studied the Homeric question, not interstellar diplomacy.
But he accepted. The UN wanted someone who could navigate the absurdity, and Benjamin Carter had a talent for calm and strange waters. A holo conference with the Valori lasted 12 minutes. The date was set. Carter would travel to the symposium.
I've spent my career arguing that myths evolve. Now I am supposed to deny they are doctrine. The irony is not lost.
He began packing his old lecture notes, dog-eared copies of the Mahabharata, a worn copy of the Odyssey. The bedtime stories he grew up with.
The reading is the deployment. The bedtime is the briefing. Maybe they have a point.
The shuttle was scheduled for the following week. Earth's cultural doctrine, accidentally broadcast, was about to meet its first official envoy.
I am not a soldier. I teach stories. But if those stories are weapons, then maybe I am exactly the right person for this. The Valori report is brilliant and completely wrong. They've described a weapon that was never aimed.
He spent 3 days with the alien analysis, cross-referencing his own research. Every tactical notation made him chuckle or shake his head.
They believe Odysseus is a logistics manual. Maybe he is. But he's also a man who just wanted to go home.
The shuttle lifted off at dawn. Earth fell away beneath him, blue and silent, its myths whispering outward through every signal.
I am carrying dog-eared paperbacks to a symposium that has millions of beings terrified. If this isn't the strangest thing humanity has ever done.
The Valori station materialized after 8 hours, a sleek silver ark, with the Earth Archive cruiser docked alongside like an ancient temple.
They've wrapped our cruiser in Greek and Sanskrit like armor. They're not just afraid, they're trying to understand.
The docking clamps engaged. An honor guard of Valori scholars waited inside the airlock, their facial tendrils twitching with curiosity.
They're looking at me like I am the keeper of the galaxy's secrets. All I have are worn translations and a lecture on narrative selection.
The symposium hall doors were already open. Inside, 100 alien delegations sat in rapt silence, waiting for the human to explain his species' most dangerous weapon. Carter entered and took his seat. The chamber held 100 species, every eye fixed on the Valori scholar rising to the podium.
Honored delegates, what you are about to see is the product of 4 years of analysis. Earth's myths are not stories. They are the most sophisticated military doctrine ever encountered.
The display zoomed into the Odyssey, then the Iliad, then the Mahabharata, tracing tactical patterns in red light. Gasps rippled through the audience.
Small unit cohesion, strategic patience, terrain exploitation, psychological warfare. Every principle is embedded in narratives that have survived for millennia.
Every word is correct. Every conclusion is wrong. They've mapped a ghost.
The insectoid ambassador clicked her mandibles. A Kree general leaned forward, claws digging into the armrest.
These stories have been broadcast openly for 200 years. No human has ever classified them. They read them to their children.
The presentation ended. The holographic display dimmed. Threth Velen turned toward the human delegation, his voice quiet but carrying.
The floor now recognizes Dr. Benjamin Carter of Earth.
Carter stood, adjusting his glasses. The weight of 100 alien species settled on his shoulders as he walked to the podium.
Thank you, Senior Translator. Your analysis is extraordinary. Every pattern you found is real. But the weapon you see was never aimed. Our myths are not constructed doctrine. They are storytelling that survived. Stories that helped us make sense of war, loss, and endurance were passed down.
A murmur swept the hall. The insectoid ambassador's antennae flattened. A Kree general shook his scaled head slowly.
You see a logistics manual. We see a man trying to go home. The pattern is there because the pattern worked for 20 centuries of listeners.
Selected, not designed. 4,000 years of listeners editing with their attention. The weapon that sharpened itself.
We read these to our children, not as training. They are lullabies, but lullabies shape the mind. The patterns sink in before we have words for them.
A Valori historian in the third row began taking furious notes. The insectoid ambassador's mandibles clicked once, then stilled.
The doctrine you fear is not a weapon. It is the shape of human survival. Stories that contained nothing useful were forgotten. What remains is what helped us endure.
Threth Velan slowly set down his stylus. The patterns he had mapped for 4 years suddenly rearranged themselves. Still doctrine, but now doctrine by natural selection. A quarter of the audience remained skeptical. A third seemed almost relieved. The rest were simply stunned into silence.
Dr. Carter, your explanation is elegant, but how do you account for the precision? The Iliad's logistics are too exact to be accidental. A child's story does not accidentally become a supply chain manual.
It did not become a manual overnight. It accumulated over centuries. Every retelling that missed a practical detail was less compelling. Listeners favored the version that felt true to war.
But the result is a weapon. Intention is irrelevant to effect. You have armed every intelligence service that bothered to listen.
You mistake the map for the territory. The patterns exist because war shaped our stories, not the other way around. We are not an armory. We are a library.
Several delegates murmured. The Kree general's claws stopped scraping his armrest. The insectoid ambassador's antennae twitched irritation or interest. No one could tell.
He is right. The doctrine is real, but it is not a weapon. It is a scar. We have been studying the scar and thinking it was the blade.
Then we have been studying the wrong thing. But the scar is still instructive. Perhaps we should not discard your analysis, Senior Translator. Merely reinterpret it.
The formal session stretched another 2 hours, but the central tension had already snapped. A quarter remained hostile. A third left looking shaken but thoughtful. No consensus was reached, but by the end of the symposium, a quiet majority had begun to understand. Earth's myths were not a plan. They were a memory that had learned to walk. Threth Velen looked at the human delegate, who was now quietly packing his notes, and felt the ground of his own certainty shift. The morning after the symposium, Valori High Command convened in closed session. The atmosphere carried a strange new tension, relief edging into uncertainty.
The human's explanation changes nothing and everything. The doctrine is real, but it is not a weapon aimed at us. It is a scar.
A general from strategic planning objected. Scar or blade, it still cuts. We cannot unlearn what we have learned.
Then we do not unlearn it. We classify it, treat it as a cultural artifact, with military implications, not as an active threat.
They are arguing about how to classify a truth that was never hidden. The irony is almost unbearable.
The intelligence director countered. If we classify it, we admit we were outmaneuvered by accidental poetry. The political cost is immense.
The political cost of ignoring it is higher. If we pretend this is not doctrine, we are willfully blind. If we treat it as an attack, we provoke Earth. Classification is the middle path.
Merrick is not a diplomat, but he understands the weight of the middle path. It will cost him, but he will take it.
The vote was not unanimous, but it was sufficient. A directive was drafted. Earth's foundational myths would be placed under restricted cultural access, pending further review. Threth Velen returned to his quarters that night, exhaustion settling deep, knowing the galaxy would never read a bedtime story the same way again. 3 days later, the Valori High Command released Directive 774. Earth's foundational mythologies were now classified as protected cultural intelligence. The signing was brief. 4 generals and a cultural attaché. No speeches. The galaxy's longest open secret was now officially restricted. Within hours, the news beams carried the story to every corner of known space. Earth's bedtime stories classified as military doctrine. On a crowded orbital station, a young Kree cadet stared at the broadcast, then opened her Iliad notes with a new sense of solemnity. The inter-empire intelligence channels lit up with acknowledgments. 16 governments confirmed the new classification within a day. At the Earth Embassy on Valori Station, a duty officer received the notification and read it twice, then burst out laughing. The laughter was not mockery. It was the sound of a species learning that its most ancient gift was also its most unsettling export. The embassy sent a priority message to Earth. Aliens have classified Homer as a security threat. Please advise. The bureaucratic machinery on both sides began to turn, but for a single, suspended moment, the galaxy held its breath. The bedtime stories were now officially more dangerous than any warship, and everyone knew it. The evening news anchor looked into the camera and said, "Aliens have classified Homer as a security threat." In cafes and living rooms, people laughed, then opened old books. The stories suddenly felt heavier and more precious.
I told them the truth. Our myths are not weapons. They are the bones of our memory. Apparently, that memory is terrifying. Yes, the galaxy now considers Homer a threat. No, we will not recall our public domain audiobooks. Bedtime stories remain open source.
The statement went viral. Memes of Achilles with a classified stamp flooded the network. That evening, in a living room in Chicago, a father read the Odyssey to his young daughter. He paused at the Cyclops chapter and murmured, with a wink, "Good strategy." She didn't understand, but she would. The pattern was already sinking in. Earth kept broadcasting. The reading continued. The deployment had never really stopped. The bedtime was the briefing. The lullaby was the manual. And the galaxy would never sleep the same way again. Threth Velen sat alone in his office, a single lamp glowing. On his desk, The final draft of his revised report waited. He wrote, "The myths were never a weapon. They were a net, catching human experience and letting only the strongest patterns through. We mistook the net for a trap. The door chimed. General Merrick entered without ceremony, his uniform slightly undone, his expression tired but calm.
The directive is signed. Earth's bedtime stories are now protected material. I imagine Dr. Carter is already making jokes about it.
He would be right, too. We have spent 4 years mapping a library and calling it an armory. The irony should embarrass us. It does not.
We were not wrong about the content, only the intent. That distinction will keep the galaxy uneasy for generations.
Perhaps that is not a bad thing. The galaxy is now writing its own myths. We are all learning to endure in stories.
They turned toward the observation window. Outside, the Earth Archive cruiser drifted, its hull wrapped in holographic Greek and Sanskrit.
Endurance is the strategy. That is what the humans said. These stories survived because they had to. And now we are all surviving with them.
Merrick nodded slowly. The twin suns of the station sat behind the cruiser, and for a moment, the ancient words seemed to glow from within. In a small bedroom under a pale nightlight, a mother opened a worn book of Greek myths. The child, too young to read, followed the rhythm of the words, already absorbing a language older than memory. The mother read of Odysseus and the Cyclops, of Achilles and his rage, of Krishna and the burden of duty. She did not pause to explain the tactics. She did not need to. The story did its own work. The reading was the deployment, the bedtime was the briefing, and the pattern, refined over 4,000 years, was sinking into another generation. Outside, the stars turned, indifferent, carrying the same signals across 200 years of static. The child would grow, and one day she would read these stories to her own daughter, adding her voice to the endless broadcast. And somewhere in the dark, a Kree cadet would open the same text, tracing the same patterns, wondering at the species that had never meant to teach war. The myths endured. The signal never stopped. The reading continued, and the galaxy, still uneasy, still awed, would never read a bedtime story the same way again. The archive cruiser's engines ignited softly, pulling away from the Velori station. Its hull shimmered, layers of Greek, Sanskrit, and now Velori script swirling together like a protective shield. The new alien myths, born from this strange encounter, had joined the ancient human texts. Behind it, the twin orange-gold giant stars hung in the eternal black, witnesses to the exchange. From the observation deck, two figures watched in silence, a general and a translator, now bound by a shared revelation. They did not speak of tactics or doctrines. The words that mattered were already written on the cruiser's hull, traveling outward. The words that had survived millennia of human history were now carried into a new epoch, half a galaxy away from their origin. They had been mistaken for weapons, but they were something more, a bridge. As the cruiser shrank to a point of light, the twin suns set, casting long amber shadows across the station's hull. And in the quiet of the void, the myth continued, unbroken, unclassified, still telling. In a Velori nursery, a small child reached up toward a hollow book and said the only word it knew in Greek, Odysseus. The parent, a scholar who had once doubted Earth's stories, opened the book with a soft click. The holographic sea swirled into being. The page showed the Cyclops scene, Greek text on one side, Velori translation on the other. The parent read aloud, voice steady, and the child listened with the same quiet intensity that children have listened for 4,000 years. Again, the child signed with its tendrils. Read it again. The parent obliged. The myth began its next millennia. The camera pulled back through the window, past the gentle amber light of the nursery, into the cold, star-dusted dark. And there, suspended in the void, a signal from Earth continued its 200-year journey. An audiobook of Beowulf, still speaking. The reading was the deployment. The bedtime was the briefing. The stories had never been weapons, and they had never been silent. They were what endured. And the galaxy, new to myth, would now endure with them.